Okay, so this video is on domain and range, and you should be on page 3.5 in your binder. To get started, we need to write definitions of domain and range. So domain is the set of all possible x values, and range, I bet you can guess, is the set of all possible y values. So to help you see what this means, we probably need to do an example. So right here, we're going to do an example using this graph of f of x. Example 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is I want to think about what are all of the possible x values for the domain and what are all of the possible y values for the range. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to label all of the points that I can see. So this point right here is -3, 2. This one is -1, 3. This one is a decimal, so this looks like it's -0.50. This one is 3, 1. This one is also a decimal, so this looks like it's 5, 0.5. And this bottom one here is 4, -3. So if I look at this list, I can think about my domain, which is the set of all possible x values. So domain is talking about x values. So let's look at what all of our x values are. We have -3, -1, -0.5, 3, 4, and 5. So if we're talking about domain, our all possible x values, remember we use that curly brace to show it's a set, and we've got -3, -1, -0.5, 3, 4, and 5. And that's the list of all the possible x values. Next here, if I want to do the range, I'm going to think about all of the possible y values. So if I look, I've got a y value of 2, I've got a y value of 3, a y value of 0, 1, 0.5, -3. So if I do my range, I've got, let's start with the lowest, to -3. Then I've got 0, 0.5, 1, 2, and 3. So I've listed all my possible y values here. These last few parts are just review. So the maximum, the highest point, I'm going to kind of erase some of this. I'm going to try anyway so that we can see it better. Okay, if I want to think about my maximum point, remember that's my highest point. My maximum is this point right here. So that is -1, 3. My minimum is the lowest point, and that looks like this. So that's 4, -3. X-intercept is where it crosses the x-axis. So if I look on this graph, I'm looking for a point that touches the x-axis. That's this point right here. So that's -0.50. And if I'm looking for a y-intercept, that's a point that crosses the y-axis. And you'll notice that the y-axis is this right here, and no points are on it. So I have no y-intercepts, none. So let's try another example now where it gets a little bit more challenging. You'll notice that in this example, there are no points. So if I'm thinking about domain, I'm still thinking about all the possible x values, but I'm noticing that I have a bunch of points. I could have a point here, I could have a point here, I could have all of these different points. Okay? And we want to think about what x values are those points between. So if I think about that, the x's that they start at, well, they start right here. That was not a very good line, but they start right here. So they start at x equals -5, and then I have them all the way over until it stops right here, up to x equals 6. And I have no gaps in between, so my domain is from x equals -5 to x equals 6. And what that's saying is that I could have any x values in between -5 and 6. Now I'm going to apply the same idea to talk about the range. So the range now is all possible y values. So I want to think about, well, where do my y values start? And remember that your y value, this is your y-axis. So my y values start down here at -2. Not a very good line. So y equals -2. And the highest that they can be is up here at y equals 5. And you'll notice that I can have a y value everywhere in between there. There's no break. So my range is from y equals -2 to y equals 5. Now we'll do those kind of review ones. So first, our maximum point. The highest point of my graph is right here. That point is at the coordinate 6, 5. The lowest point of my graph, my minimum, is right here at 3, -2. My x-intercepts, where it crosses the x-axis, I've got one point right there and one point right there. And you'll notice they're not quite whole numbers. So those look like 1.750 and maybe 3.750 to me. And I've got a y-intercept. This one does have a y-intercept, crosses the y-axis right there at 0, 3. There are two more examples on the back of the paper, and you'll notice that this example 3 is almost exactly the same as example 2, except we've got this arrow going on. So what we need to think about here is that the furthest to the left, where my x values start, is still over here at x equals -5. So it goes from x equals -5 to, and then it goes all the way over here, but you'll notice that this keeps going, and since this is going kind of up and to the right, that means my x values are going to keep going this way. And they're going to go on and on and on and on forever, all the way out to x equals positive infinity. So when you have an arrow, you have the possibility of having infinity happen. So now let's try the range. The range also still starts in the same place. The lowest y value we can have is -2. So we have from y equals -2, whoops, all the way up. You can see it's going to keep going, keep going, keep going, and if it keeps going this way, it's going to be y equals infinity. 2y equals infinity, positive infinity. So this time, when we're talking about the maximum value, we don't really have an absolute maximum. It keeps going on and on forever. And when we do maximum, we really like to point to a specific point. And since this goes to infinity, we don't have a maximum. Our minimum is still the same at 3, -2. Our y-intercepts are still the same. We have 1.750 and 3.750, and our y-intercept is still the same at 0, 3. Last one. So now we've got two arrows going on. You see there's an arrow here and an arrow there. So what does that mean? Since this one is kind of going down and to the left, and this one is going up to the right, my x values are really going to start like over here because it's going to the left, and they're going to end over here to the right. So really, my domain is from x equals -infinity to x equals positive infinity. And same thing, if I'm thinking about y values, my lowest y value is going to be, well, it's going down. So from y equals -infinity to, since right here it's going up, y equals positive infinity. And since these both go off to infinity, we don't really have a real maximum. So I'm going to write none. We don't really have a real minimum because it goes to negative infinity, positive infinity. X-intercepts, you can see there's one here at negative 2, 0. There's another one right here at 4, 0. And our y-intercept, you'll notice that this is not quite a whole number. So be careful, we're not going to write it as a whole number. We've got 0, maybe 3.2. I'd encourage you to watch this video again. I know that I went really fast through it. We're focusing on domain and range, but I wanted you guys to get some extra practice with maximum, minimum, x-intercepts, and y-intercepts.